OT base is OT asset inventory. When we talk about asset inventory, we're talking about the whole picture of that inventory. So it becomes not just about a list of devices, but also the context for those devices. What are the relationships of those devices? What are my devices that are obsolete? What are my devices that are becoming obsolete? What are my devices that have maybe outdated firmware? What's the installed content on those devices? What applications are on my workstations? What vulnerabilities are associated with all of these devices? So it becomes about context. It's more than just a list of devices. It has to be about the whole picture of my environment. So when we look at inventory in its base form here, we see the list of devices. Here's everything broken down. But there's more to the picture than that. It's more than just the device. So when we open up a device, we can see all my information about it. Right? So some of the context that you can provide is context that the user can provide. If the user has floor maps, they can upload floor maps to the system. Well, the system is going to provide location information, so then you can actually pinpoint on that floor map the exact physical location of the device. So that way, when users open up and they say, okay, well, I need to do maintenance on this particular device, they have a quick way to identify, okay, well, there it is. There's its exact location. There's other user-definable context that can be provided about a device. Criticality. So a device might be critical for a number of different reasons. It might be critical to, in this particular case, engineering. Maybe it's a safety system. Maybe it's business continuity. Maybe it's a production line. There's a number of different user-definable fields. You can create as many as you want, and you can give devices criticality so that helps you to identify the device as critical, as well as the system from a vulnerability management to know that, hey, this device should be given a higher score from a risk standpoint because it's critical. There's more context that can be given to devices beyond just what the user does as well. So there's context that's gathered from the network information. For instance, we see in this configuration, this is a Windows 7 device. Maybe it's Windows 7 because it has to be. It's an older device, it's connected to older equipment, it has to stay Windows 7. Well, there's a whole bunch of vulnerabilities associated with that, and there's not really much to be done about that. No patches coming out for Windows 7. But we can provide additional context about that device. Okay, well, it's Windows 7, but at least when I'm looking at it for its network exposure, it's private network traffic only. So it's Windows 7, it's got vulnerabilities, but it's not connected to the internet. It's not receiving public network traffic. So that makes me feel a little bit better about this device. So when we're talking about Windows 7, we're talking about a device, a workstation. Well, let's show additional context about this workstation. Let's show all the applications that are installed on it. Because if we're talking about vulnerabilities, most of the vulnerabilities that are associated with the workstation are going to be associated with the installed applications. So the system is not only going to inventory those devices and what's on those devices, but it's going to inventory that software in the whole. So that gives you even more ability to create even more context for those devices. You can do things like create compliance standards. You can say, okay, well, I want to make sure that I don't have any devices in my environment that have a version of Google Chrome that's older than whatever I define. And then the system can generate those reports and say, okay, well, here's a list of your 72 non-compliant devices. So that can be addressed. You can also take it from the standpoint of vulnerabilities. So we obviously have to look at vulnerabilities, especially if we're talking about a Windows device. We can see context about what sort of security software is installed on individual devices. Security patches. When was this device last patched? What patches are loaded on it? And then what vulnerabilities are currently associated with this device. We can sort by known exploits only, or we can uncheck that box and thousands. But we can filter this down and work this down because we have that context and look at individual vulnerabilities and prioritize our vulnerabilities. So in addition to showing you the context of the vulnerabilities that are associated with an individual device, those vulnerabilities themselves are also inventoried. So it's not just about one device and the vulnerabilities that are on that one device. It becomes about the vulnerability itself. So I can look at that vulnerability, I can see all the context that's associated with it, all the information about it, attack complexity, and then details that are published about that vulnerability from whether that be from NIST or Microsoft or whoever. And then if it's a Microsoft vulnerability and there's remediation steps, the associated patches that are for that remediation. But then that next step, because we're inventorying the vulnerability and comparing it against the whole inventory, not just one device at a time, I can see a list. Okay, well, there's 72 devices in my inventory that are affected by this vulnerability, and here they are broken down by my individual facilities. So I can see in my Flat Rock facility, there's all the devices that are affected by this vulnerability. So if you want to say, okay, well, this is a bad vulnerability, we need to do something about this, you can create a remediation task. That remediation task can go out and the individual users, my user who's in Flat Rock is going to see that remediation task, and he or she is going to see the list of all the devices in that environment, and then they can go in, they can load these patches, and then the system is going to continue to contextualize that information even beyond just the initial identification of that vulnerability. So as those patches get loaded and that device gets rectified, these orange devices are going to change to blue. And they're going to show you, okay, yep, got that, checked it off, working my way through it. So you can prioritize those vulnerabilities because nobody's going to patch all their vulnerabilities. It's just too much. But you can prioritize your work and you can narrow it down to, okay, well, these are the vulnerabilities that are important. This is what's important to me, so I can address those vulnerabilities. But then beyond just vulnerabilities, there's further context to be provided because it's not just about vulnerabilities, it's about, just assuming my mouse is going to work here. It's about lifecycle information. So there's more to it than just vulnerabilities. There's a lot more to the environment and to risk in your environment beyond just what sorts of vulnerabilities could be exposed. There's things like lifecycle. Okay, so this is a Rockwell PLC. I'm looking at the details about that. Well, I can see that information about that PLC has been contextualized with that lifecycle information from Rockwell. Well, this device is discontinued. Do I have a backup for this device? If I don't, well, I can't get another one because it's discontinued. And then it takes it a step further. So we're looking at this PLC. We see all the cards that are installed on this PLC rack. Well, what about the firmware on those cards? Is that firmware out of date? Okay, well, there you go. So now we know, okay, I have out-of-date firmware on some of these devices. Does that need to be patched? Well, maybe not. But without that context, you can't really approach that. But then we're also going to expose the life cycle for those individual cards, because it may not just be the PLC that's discontinued, it might be a card on that PLC. So from a standpoint of the backup management, then you can make sure, okay, well, I need to make sure that I've got backups for the devices that I know I can't get replacements for. So, and then, so there's even more context to beyond just that device level context. So we're also talking about things like the network information. So that network information is gathered, those networks themselves are inventoried. So it's not just the devices. So again, that makes a big difference from a number of different standpoints, both from the standpoint of security, but also those system relationships. So we can show things like topology diagrams. These topology diagrams are drawn by the system automatically as it goes through and gets that discovery information. So that gives me the ability to see these connections and these system breakdowns so that I can make sure that I understand where devices are inside my network hierarchy. These diagrams and all these diagrams that you see in here, these are dynamically drawn by the system as it's going. So if, for instance, I have an engineer, they're working on this system, this device is moved from one line to another line. The system's going to automatically redraw this diagram to reflect that as that system moves to another. Having this information, having this detailed context about that network connection and how those devices connect to one another and where they are in physical space allows us to take that next step in that user-definable category, and that we can create those system relationships. We can show relationships and how these devices, I didn't need the whole thing, it's too much. So then these system relationships can be defined inside the system. So you can group devices into logical systems. So this is an example of an automotive manufacturing plant. So we can have body in white, the bumper system, safety systems, and these can be grouped, and then these system relationships can be defined so you can see both how the systems relate to one another, but then what systems are dependent on one another to help draw you and bring all that context in together to paint that clear picture of how everything in my environment relates. I've kind of been yapping for a second here. Does anybody have any questions?
Well, what I've seen so far is very good. Is it designed to run continually, and is it lightweight?
Yes, so absolutely. So the way that the way the system works is, so what we're looking at right now is inventory. This is where all the data happens. This is where all that context happens. There's another component, and that other component is the discovery node. And that's a software component. It's designed to be able to be installed in the process network on an existing piece of hardware, an engineering workstation. We have a couple different flavors, Linux, Windows, Moxabus. So it can be Moxabox. So it can be installed on a workstation. It can be installed even on a switch. There's a couple different ways, a containerized version, so you can do it. And the way that discovery node is going to work is, by default, it's set to wake up every 24 hours, and it does a protocol-based discovery, or actively solicits information from the devices using their legitimate protocols, so Ethernet IP, Siemens S7, Modbus, Profinet, so on and so forth. Gathers the information from those devices up into a file and then passes it up to inventory. And then inventory does all the heavy lifting for all the contextualization. And so once the discovery node has done that and gathered information, then it goes back to sleep. Then it just waits, and then the next time its schedule comes up, it refreshes. So yes, to answer your question, it's meant to be a constant solution where it's every day it's refreshing and updating these devices as they go through.
But it's not every millisecond.
No, it's not a constant monitoring solution. Like I said, the default, absolutely. The default configuration is every 24 hours, but that is entirely definable to your needs. If you don't need it to discover every single day, it could be once a week or once a month or once a quarter or whatever. The default schedule is built around the idea that those new vulnerabilities are published once every 24 hours. So you get a refreshed inventory once every 24 hours.
Now, on disconnected networks,
Mm-hmm.
where it's not going to have internet access to pull down new files, is there a way to manually do updates?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So depending on which network you mean is disconnected. So the process network, absolutely. So the discovery node is, if it's that facility is air gapped, or there's a DMZ or whatever, it's disconnected. That doesn't matter. It doesn't affect the way the system runs in any way. So the inventory. So the traffic going into the inventory is one way only. It only receives data. It never reaches down into that process network. So there's never any reason to open up that security layer between there. And the discovery nodes are autonomous. So they just run. They do their thing. They don't wait for any instructions. They don't have a connection to inventory. They run and they produce their file. So in the case that this facility is air gapped, what that discovery node is going to do is it's going to run and it's going to create its file, and it's just going to drop it in a folder that's of your choice. And then that you can just pick that file up from that folder and traverse that data across the air gap however you would traverse data. And then just so long as it makes it to the inventory one way or another, then that's where all that contextualization and the heavy lifting will happen.
Good. So it works multi-site, even.
Yep, absolutely.
Take a boat to get there.
Yep. So the discovery node is a network. It's a network discovery. It's going to discover everything that it can discover within inside that distinct routable network segment. So it's built around the idea of being scalable. You would have multiple different discovery nodes across those individual distinct network segments. And then each one of the discovery nodes has its geographic locations provided to it. And so that's how it knows when inventory receives that data, it gets that information from those discovery nodes as well. So it knows where each one of those devices is located. And this is also important because the way that the devices are handled inside of inventory. So IP addresses, everything's got an IP address, but the IP address is not a primary identifier in a system. It's simply a piece of metadata that's collected about the devices. So we recognize that in a large environment, you're probably going to have multiple different networks that are all going to have that same IP scheme. Right. So that's the reality. You're going to be, there's nothing to get around that. Well, because that IP address isn't that primary identifier, the identifier is assigned to the device level itself from the discovery node when it's discovered. Well, those devices aren't duplicates. They're shown as individuals in their individual facilities. All right, stop it. Back to the emitter. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And I assume there's a way to manually trigger a discovery.
Yes.
If you're switching out a piece of equipment.
Yep, absolutely. So the discovery node, it can be manually activated or it can be automatically activated depending on how you configure it.
Okay.
Yeah, I lost my. There we go. All right.
Okay.
So yeah. So and then, like I said, the how the discovery runs is entirely configurable. So the discovery node is meant in the production running environment to run headless. It just sits in the background. It's a service. It runs. It does its thing. But it has a configuration, a head on it, a user interface, which is for that initial configuration, and that's where you would define what subnets you wanted it to discover inside of, or if there are certain subnets inside your environment that you wanted to exclude. It will show you all the protocols that it's going to use to discover devices, and you can choose to exclude certain protocols if you don't need them or whatnot. So, and then you can also manually trigger that discovery run if you wanted to. The one example, the only thing that the discovery node is doing when it's not actively discovering is it's monitoring that ARP table to see if any new devices show up so that it knows, hey, there's something new that I would now need to discover. If you wanted to, in that instance, a new device showed up and you wanted to trigger a discovery manually, you can simply open up the discovery and hit probe, and it'll go ahead and run and do it right then. Any other questions?
Keep asking them. The discovery nodes, how do they receive? You said all the heavy lifting is done at the inventory.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the one that would need data updates.
Yep. So that, like I said, we can look at that diagram. So typically, the inventory is going to live in your enterprise level, where it's going to be able to have access to the internet, so that it can receive data from vulnerability data from NIST, Microsoft, and then that the hardware data about firmware and obsolescence. Now, that being said, it doesn't have to be that way. So if you wanted to have the system, so it can be configured as an entirely on-premise solution, and if you wanted it to be entirely disconnected, it can be entirely disconnected. It doesn't have to connect to get to do the stuff. You wouldn't get the vulnerability data, but that's not a requirement of the system. And then if you wanted it to be entirely disconnected, and then you wanted to simply download that vulnerability data or the obsolescence data manually and import it into the system, you can do that as well. So it can be configured to your needs. The hallmark of the system is it's meant to be able to be configured to what you need it to do, not forcing you to change your environment to make it work.
Right. Which also means if one of the sites I'm supporting is having a problem with something, they could send me the discovery data and I could read it in inventory to see, you know, did you change anything? Oh, no, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's not what I'm seeing.
Well, that's another good example of contextualization that you mentioned. So, in addition to watching to the devices and how they connect, we're also watching events as those events happen on those devices. So, a good example would be change devices.
Yeah.
So, as devices get changed over time, that's tracked by the system. So, and that means if there's a PLC and that PLC, somebody changed one of the cards on that PLC, a new card was added, a card was removed, that's going to show up as a change device. New piece of software is installed on an engineering workstation or something's updated, so it's going to be that's a change device. We're also monitoring things from those workstations, health events, stuff like memory overruns, hard disk errors, CPU usage. So you can see. Yep. So you can see a device that's maybe having issues before it's gone down completely. And then also devices that have been unseen. So devices that are discovered and added to the inventory, they're given permanence. So even if they're disconnected or they go offline, they remain in the inventory. They don't just disappear and go away, but they become a part of this report. So you see, this is a device that hasn't been seen, hasn't been connected in 7 days or 30 days or 24 hours. So you can say, okay, well, why? Why is that device not there anymore? If it doesn't just go away, it just becomes a part of the device unseen.
Yeah. So if someone plugs something in and then unplugs it afterwards, then I would still know that something had appeared on the network.
Mm-hmm.
Like charging their cell phone.
Probably not a cell phone, but yeah. But yes, for your example, if a device is on there and if it's included as part of the inventory, then it stays as part of the inventory. So, and then that goes so that in addition to the context that's generated automatically by the system, and we talk about the user-generated context. One of the things that one of the types of context that users can generate would be their own devices, manually added devices. So, for instance, if you had offline devices, maybe there's a cabinet with spare PLCs. Those can be added manually in here, and you can give them the location, spares cabinet, building 2. And those devices would then also be tracked by the inventory. And when that device was connected, it would be picked up by the inventory and moved to the location that it was connected in.
Which also gives you the advantage that you could use these reports for physical inventory.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because
That's.
you know where it is, what it's running, is it online, is it offline, has it been moved?
Yep.
You don't have to, 16 years ago, Betty put her into her desk.
Absolutely.
She needed more space. So
Well,
you can find it under
Yep, that's the big part about having that one centralized inventory, because there's so much tribal knowledge in many of these environments. Somebody probably knows a whole lot about the Flat Rock facility and that assembly section. They know everything about that, but they don't know everything about the other facilities that are spread out all over everywhere else. This allows you to bring all of that knowledge and all of that context for those devices together into one place. And then the user management is built into the system, so you can grant access to all those individuals. So that person who is in charge of the Flat Rock facility, they log into their OT base instance in the morning and they see Flat Rock. They don't see the whole world, they just see Flat Rock. And then they can do everything with their FlatRock, and any of those tasks, the remediation tasks, the reports, the compliance standards, all that stuff, they see all that messages, but they only see FlatRock.
Right.
And then the same for any of those other. And then your administrative, they would see the whole environment.
Right. Because for insider threat mitigation, FlatRock doesn't make a ceasefire.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not in administration, you should see one in your assembly line.
Right. Yep. So all that's part of it. And then that's the system, the licensing model for the system is based purely on the number of devices that you want to hold in your inventory. So you can have as many users or as many discovery nodes as you need to get the job done and get the environment built the way you want it. And it's just about how many devices do I want to hold in my inventory.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay. Well, excellent. Thank you very much. Oh, go ahead. No.
The relationships between devices automatically from the network?
Yes. So when that discovery node's running, it's communicating with all the devices in their protocol. So for instance, those switches, it's going to communicate with them with SNMP. So from there, it's going to pull NetFlow and SFlow data from those switches, and it's going to use that to help build that network relationship. Certainly.
Which version of SNMP?
So the primary one is obviously going to be version 3. That's the credentialed version of SNMP. It also supports 1 and 2. If you have older devices that are using 1 and 2, then that's fine. But most of your big new switches are going to be SNMP 3. And then inside that discovery node, during the initial configuration phase, you would provide credentials to the discovery node so that it can gather that information. It will be the same for the workstations, so they're going to have WMI credentials to get that detailed information from those workstations. Any other questions? Excellent. Thank you very much.